has won the ideological debate. We are losing the debate over electability. I cannot tell you how many people our campaign has spoken to who have said, and I quote, "I like what your campaign stands for. I agree with what your campaign stands for, but I'm going to vote for Joe Biden because I think Joe is the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump." End of quote. We have heard that statement all over this country. Needless to say, I strongly disagree with that assertion. But that is what millions of Democrats and independents today believe. On Sunday, I very much look forward to the debate in Arizona with my friend Joe Biden. And let me be very frank as to the questions that I will be asking Joe. Joe, what are you going to do for the 500,000 people who go bankrupt in our country because of medically related debt? And what are you going to do for the working people of this country and small business people who are paying on average 20% of their incomes for health care? Joe, what are you going to do to end the absurdity of the United States of America being the only major country on earth where health care is not a human right? Are you really going to veto a Medicare for all bill if it is passed in Congress? Joe, how are you going to respond to the scientists who tell us we have 7 or 8 years remaining to transform our energy system before irreparable harm takes place to this planet because of the ravages of climate change? Joe, at a time when most young people need a higher education to make it into the middle class, what are you going to do to make sure that all of our people can go to college or trade school regardless of their income? And what are you going to do about the millions of people who are struggling with outrageous levels of student debt? Joe, at a time when we have more people in jail than communist China, a nation 4 times our size, what are you going to do to end mass incarceration and a racist criminal justice system? And what are you going to do to end the terror that millions of undocumented people experience right now because of our broken and inhumane immigration system? Joe, what are you going to do about the fact that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, and are living with the fact that 500,000 people tonight are homeless and 18 million families are spending half of their income to put a roof over their heads? Joe, importantly, what are you going to do to end the absurdity of billionaires buying elections and the 3 wealthiest people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of our people? So let me conclude the way I began. Donald Trump must be defeated, and I will do everything in my power to make that happen. On Sunday night, in the first one-on-one debate of this campaign, the American people will have the opportunity to see which candidate is best positioned to accomplish that goal. Thank you all very much.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where we say we will never stop fighting and hoping until we can't, with super producer Matt Leck.
We will never stop fighting and hoping until we can.
I mean death.
Oh,
yeah. I'm not saying like some bad news. I'm saying like till we expire. Although I do like Fernando Flores, the former Chilean finance minister, once said, hope is the raw material of losers, which should have been the response to the Obama campaign. But we will keep fighting with chief economist David Griscom.
In the words of Paul Robeson, I must keep fighting until I'm dying.
Exactly. That's much more eloquent from a great American hero than what I was attempting. On this week's program, the indispensable and great Adolph Reed Jr. I think if more people were reading him instead of retweeting each other, we would be in a much better place. We are talking about the liberal portrayal on foreign policy and how that actually makes us understand the stakes of where we are at today, and maybe even why Bernie Sanders needs to go forward and do a Hillary Clinton-style deplorable speech about the PMC class, which is what I'm proposing. I'll run that by Dr. Reed. We also have a whole bunch of other things to get to, including, of course, a gem on the real, just incredible rationality of our marketplace, which is expressed through the response to the coronavirus outbreak, which is a direct consequence of the systemic gutting of global health systems over the past several decades. We're also going to do a shout out. Every single person on the ground and at a grassroots level who has made calls, knocked on doors, and done what they can for the Bernie Sanders campaign. The Bernie Sanders campaign is the most decent thing to happen in modern American life. We honor it. We'll learn from it. We'll fight out from it. And we will also finally build a strategic, sane, emotionally intelligent left. That's going to be the project, folks. More news from Bolivia. The OAS could really be put into a corner. Andrew Yang endorsed Joe Biden, and there's actually a much bigger thing to understand here about the nature of the elite project than just the thing that should come as no surprise about Andrew Yang. We've also got a whole bunch more signs to get to. We're going to talk about ideology, sniff, and we're going to talk about hegemony in the postgame. It's a jam-packed show, although I will say, in the spirit of Elizabeth Warren and in the voice of Dr. King, we don't owe you anything. Unless you're a patron, patreon.com/TMBS, and then we honor you. Although, actually, if I really push that logic, the Warren people were even worse. It actually, especially the patrons, we don't owe you anything. Self-care time in TMBS. All right, folks, all that and much, much more on the Michael Brooks Show. Liz Franzik was going to be on the show. She couldn't last minute, but we will reschedule. First, let's talk about what we need to learn and where we need to go. The Democratic Party leadership is committed to stopping progressive change, no matter how absolutely necessary or popular. In the debunk with Ben Burgess later, we were going to talk about Joe Biden saying that he would not sign legislation for Medicare for all during a major public health crisis. Now, this is actually very important because if the Democratic Party elite was a non-ideological, malleable thing that was not ensconced in money and not ensconced in a particular ideology, they would support that bill because it's the rational thing to do. If you were just from a real tech wonk place, you would look at this crisis and you would say, clearly, one of the key steps to avert catastrophe is properly insuring every single American. That would be a non-ideological response, in addition to obviously being a moral one. But they are not. They are not. And by the way, this evening we will be streaming Donald Trump's 9 o'clock press conference. Liberals and the PMC will betray us, and the Warren campaign proves that. Now, let's be very clear about this. When this whole debate sparked several months ago, there was a particularly aggravating piece in N+1 that was sort of like, oh, you Bernie peoples critique the PMC, but chances are you are a PMC yourself if you're writing an article or talking on a podcast. Okay. I mean, look, this is very analogous to you oppose the barbarism of capitalism, but yet you buy things or pay rent. Like, sure, of course. It's not about demonizing a class of people. It's about seriously understanding where they stand ideologically and socially. And if we just look very specifically at Elizabeth Warren and the campaign that she represents, let's be very clear about three things. One, narrow, woke 1990s academic discourses does not motivate anywhere near a majority of the electorate, including in the Democratic Party, and it never will. Number two, the obsession with technocracy and getting things, quote unquote, right does not have anything to do with A, either building a mass movement, or three, quite obviously, serious commitment to that project. Because after the months of we are the most rational, smart, and committed, what did we see? Months of just narcissism and entitlement. And frankly, you can live in narcissism and entitlement if you don't have any skin in the game. And when I say skin in the game, I'm not talking, I want to be, again, I'll be extremely clear, and I'll be very clear editorially. There are absolutely intersecting ways in which people can be mistreated, discriminated against, and so on because of various identities. No question. The base of my politics is about poor and working people. In fact, those people are disproportionately people of color, because the history of this country is an example. But my line is working people, period, regardless of their background. Period, full stop. That's why people in 2016 and folks even in 2020 are much more likely to not be able to have a politics just of personal spite. And I'm talking in the large aggregate sense, okay? People can perform on Twitter. I think there's actually legitimate strategic arguments that need to happen. But people who live on the edge, who are actually need to be addressed by a serious economic program, they don't have time to sit back in narcissistic self-indulgence. And certainly, if the shoe was on the other foot, we all know what Sanders and most of his supporters would have done. And that just shows, again, it's not just point scoring. If you really check it out, you'll see that you have to understand the different stakes and the different mentalities that people are coming into fights with. Because if you can check out of a battle for single-payer healthcare, because first it's politically expedient, or you get, psyched out of it by bad press coverage. And then if it devolves several months later into using Republican talking points to discredit it, and then it dissolves even more where, prominent people who represent you in various ways or claim to speak on your behalf, and you yourself, of course, go on SNL instead of fighting for the candidate that would give everybody health care if he could. You are showing that you're fundamentally unserious and that you can be fundamentally unserious. And that allows us to understand a really core tension. If more poor folks and young folks voted, Bernie Sanders would win. Now, yes, there's plenty of working class voters that have voted for Joe Biden, and that goes back to another thing about what exactly is appealing here, right? And I think that goes back to, frankly, that Bernie Sanders needed to do some different things drastically from 2016. There's actually some things they did 100% right in 2016, which they should have doubled down on. But whatever way leads to building out this base that is actually rooted in working people is extraordinarily hard. And there's a huge amount riding against it. A lot of it having to do with the fact that a lot of people feel totally crushed for very understandable reasons. And they don't see a viability in politics. But communicating that and getting a coalition that's rooted in that is going to be essential for any left project. It is not, and has never been in any context, driven by people in a liberal professional class. Plenty of people in a liberal professional class can be great and are important and can play significant roles, but it cannot be the energy of a movement. That is proven again and again and again and again. And I defy you to look anywhere in the world where a systemic overhaul was rooted in just that one particular class. And so we need to understand how the left moves well beyond that. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, is of course a swindle. Marx clearly understood that modern democracies were set up to benefit the rich while providing the illusion of democracy. In this country, that manifests very specifically as assaults on voting rights. And in the beginning of our country, limiting voting to white male property owners is proof of how incomplete and, in fact, anti-democratic things were from the beginning. There continues to be voting hurdles. And what is understood now about Marx's view of democracy by both the ultra-left and the right wing was that Marx did not reject democracy. Rather, he called for its expansion. He wanted democracy. He recognized that the appeal to democracy to be used by the ruling class to mask their rule, and the way they fight against it was not to reject democracy, but to demand more of it in every sphere of life. To put simply, to replace the illusion of democracy that benefits the few into the practice of democracy that benefits the many. This means expanding access to the vote, ending the monopoly of the ballot line by the Democratic and GOP elites. And to be very clear, that's a systemic project of actually reforming the system. It's not a protest vote project. I'm not going to spend an extraordinary amount of time on this show at all talking about who to vote for if Joe Biden's the nominee. And I will do one of my classic, a position that I'm sure will piss a lot of people off. If you were in a swing state, I would tell you that I personally would never vote in a way that would facilitate Donald Trump getting reelected president. I would not. I wouldn't do it. I think that there is enough human stake in those margins still there to vote in such a way as to ensure he does not get a second term. On the other hand, I'll tell Democratic concern troll types, I'm not doing the Democratic Party's work for them. These folks are fundamentally opposed to what we want to build as a society. And they have pulled out more stops and acted with more efficacy and strategy to gut a decent human being and generate social democracy than anything they've done in modern politics. People that are known for being shambolic, for negotiating against themselves, for losing, and for, of course, just being, at the end of the day, pawns of big business, have come together to block what is a vital youth-centered movement with the only policy answers to any of the problems we deal with, whether it's climate or corona or just basic human decency. So I'm not going to be fighting for those people who spit on the face and not just, and I don't mean in a Warren sense. I don't care, okay? That's the part I want to really, if James Carville says mean things about us, so what? Fuck James Carville. I say mean things about him. I'm talking about the policy. I'm talking about Joe Biden could say we're all a bunch of fucking lunatics. But if he was forced, because we had the actual Machiavellian power to threaten them sufficiently in political terms, like vote withholding terms, and I don't know if we're there yet. That's a conversation for the postgame. And I mean, again, literally, tactically, I don't know if we're able to do something like that. I don't care if Joe Biden, what he says about us or thinks about us. This isn't a whining self-care thing. This is a policy thing. Understand the distinction. These are open questions. And the closest I can tell you right now is that this show is going to be very interested in what those questions are and how to get better answers. It's not going to be obsessed with hoarding people into Democratic voting, and it's certainly not going to be obsessed with casting pointless protest votes. That will annoy a lot of different people, but we have to be rigorous and intellectually honest. And I will always tell you what I think one should do to the best of my ability. But ultimately, we need to build a left that's actually fit to fight. And we're very far from there. There's a lot of work to do. We must fight to expand democracy against all those who aim to oppress it. Neoliberal, neo-right, neo-authoritarian. But we need to have clear eyes, and we need to push back against the illusion and limits that trap democracy and benefit the elites. To build a genuine democracy across all spheres of life, we need to move to a post-capitalist economy. And that needs to be figured out to be messaged and conveyed in a way that folks can understand intuitively and across the board. not as a counterculture, but as a pre-mainstream culture. And I have no doubt that as hard as it is, and as painful as it is, that if we're strategic, if we're good to each other, and that also the conditions are calling for it. The conditions are calling for it. There, I don't like to look at politics in naturalistic terms at all, but there is some element of if we're in a if we looked at society as just scientific problems, right? There is a reality of inequality. There is a reality of how growth only benefits a fraction of the population. There's a reality of shrinking prospects. There's a reality of ecological destruction. And the two prime modes that capital manifests to deal with those challenges and govern how things work reinforce and magnify the problem and do not work for an overwhelming majority of human beings. So that means there needs to be a solution there. That literally means there's something in the body politic that needs to be generated. And it is already coming into being to some extent. But we've got a lot more work to do. Again, guys, we're going to be a little bit off because we got to get to Adolph quickly. But what we'll do is we'll kind of go, a little bit like in reverse order. We'll get to the shout out. We'll get to the gem after we interview Adolph and a bunch of other stuff. I want to just say that it's extraordinarily important to become a patron. I think the paradox, as I keep saying, is that obviously if this doesn't go infinitely beyond media, and let alone independent media, into unionism, into, models like Cooperation Jackson and serious actual plans for national power that can build out as the successes of the Sanders campaign, which is, of course, ongoing. And I think what Bernie did today was excellent. And I think he threaded the needle perfectly. And I think good things could come from that debate. And we're not done yet by any stretch of the imagination. As much as it needs to be bigger, the role of refining what the left is, thinking through hard questions, and having fun while we do it and building it in a way that it's appealing, as well as internationalizing it, because we don't have a choice. This show is a very internationalist show, and it's partially because it's what interests me and it's what we have built networks around and what we care about, but it's also because that is, we don't have the luxury of isolationism anymore. It's not how the world works. In great ways, in inspiring, solidarity-driven ways, in ways that we can learn a hell of a lot from. The ANC Freedom Charter has more to teach us about how to establish these things in here, or in fact, contemporary South Africa, if we look at that disaster, than almost any kind of modern discourse I see in liberal or left circles in the United States. That's the huge benefit of an internationalist, globalized perspective. And then on the other hand, Corona. Like, we are in a global world, for better or for worse, and these patterns and trends, synchronicities and disharmonies need to be figured out and work together. We're doing that work, and it's very unique work. And we rely on you to do it, and well, to build out. We're going to be publishing our own books. We're going to be getting our own studio. We're going to be doing some new offerings and maybe even potentially doing some things with helping amplify even more some of our regular, like the great Milton Alamati. So go become a patron, patreon.com/TMBS. If you go to tmbs.fm, you will see links. June 12th, we're in Boston and Somerville. I'm so excited to go there. Come see us. Austin's still on. We'll decide over the weekend. I guess there's a possibility it could be canceled, but as of now, it's certainly not canceled, and we're excited to come see you. Austin is totally clear as of now. The whole state of Texas is. Those shows, and I just did The Hill with Crystal and Sagar and Kyle Kalinske last week, live show. And I did like a 30-minute Chris Matthews impression, it felt like. But those things are important. The real life component is actually really fun and really important. And of course, there's merch, and my book is coming out in April. That's firm. I just got the notification that the first several hundred copies are at the printers. So there'll be a lot more of that in the coming weeks as well. Folks, we can do this. We'll be right back with Adolph Reed Jr. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now, honor and privilege to welcome one of our friends, and I will say mentors, Adolph Reed Jr. He's the author of, among many books, Class Notes, which everybody should just, I'm going to keep bothering everybody until you order it. He's also a professor emeritus at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as a longtime labor organizer and political activist. Adolph, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, hey, man. Thanks for having me. It's always good.
It's such a pleasure. It's definitely one of the honors of the job. Would you mind for a second standing up and showing us the awesome T-shirt you're wearing?
Surely. How's that?
Yes. There it is, man. That's what we need. It's I love, and it's very appropriate because we're going to talk about, you know, the state of things and what we need to learn and where we need to go and yada, yada, yada. But I think very in keeping with this show and something that you articulate better than anybody is actually you can understand the kind of liberal PMC mindset by understanding the traditional democratic foreign policy from Vietnam to the attempts at coups in Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua today. You wrote a piece in 2019, Vietnam to Venezuela, U.S. interventionism and the failure of the left. Can you talk about that?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it was prompted by yet another one of those dog pile on the rabbit moments where liberals were stumbling all over themselves to be most flamboyant in denouncing Bolivia or the Bolivian government and then defending the coup against the Bolivian government. And of course, it's what they've been doing with Venezuela ever since Chavez was elected. And I was just saying to a friend of mine this afternoon, it's really ironic among the left. I'm not even talking about just the liberals at this point, but among those leftists who, since from 2002 or from 98, right, found one reason or another to be critical of the PSUV government in Venezuela, mainly because it wasn't pure enough, and because Chavez made too many concessions to his old cronies in the army. And now, of the entire pink tide, the only left government that remains standing is in Venezuela. And it's standing in large measure because the military supports the government. So, I mean, there's a lesson to be taken there. Mm-hmm. And that's what prompted me to write the piece. And my friend Steve Striffler, who is actually a Latin Americanist by profession, wrote a companion piece that was also very good on these matters.
So,
but
sorry, go ahead.
For now, I'm trying to remember exactly when this was. Maybe around 2009 or 2010, I think, when Correa in Ecuador was also trying to extend a term or something. I mean, the U.S. went after him bitterly, right, from the Obama administration, and a bunch of us kind of pulled together a letter to protest this and to get straight the story about what was actually happening then in Ecuador. And how it makes sense for American leftists to think about the pink tide, or made sense for American leftists to think about the pink tide. And for God's sake, to forget or to drop this notion that left governments elsewhere in the world should craft their policies and their political statements to palliate the left wing of the Democratic Party here, right? I found it offensive since the Sandinistas, like in the 1980s.
I want to do a little bit of self-critique here because I think but it comes to the second part of my question, which I think just opens the door up basically to everything from the foreign policy thing to the just sort of mind-boggling narcissism of the Warren contingent, which, is worth emphasizing because was branded as being, at least kind of on the same continuum as us. And you still see a lot of folks indulging that narrative. But I was a Chomsky kid, and I was very, aware of U.S. crimes and wrongdoing overseas and so on. And then there came a certain point where, and I think it's healthy, anybody who grows up in a with a certain way, you got to kind of expand your reading habits and take on different perspectives. And also, look, I was a poor, financially strapped, hippie kid. So I wanted to read The Economist. I wanted to feel like maybe there was a hope that I could, make money at one point. And so there's always these personal reasons. But so there was a period of time where, even though I was very fascinated and, particularly, drawn to, the pink tide was really the only thing in the world that, if you had any sense of wanting, some alternative to the model. So even though I was trying to make myself moderate, like Obama and everything, I had that phase. I still was fascinated by the pink tide because it represented something different, and the leaders were extraordinary. And there's this, but there was this tendency, and I'll wrap up in a second, which I think wasn't totally unhealthy, to actually say, look, the United States isn't the only variable in the world. Other governments have their own, they have their own patronage networks. They have their own selfishness. They, every government in the world basically commits some form or another of what we consider to be a human rights abuse. And, and in the last year or two, it's not that I reject that position, and I still actually get allergic to folks who can't, not so much in Latin America, but I would say sometimes around Syria, that I've come into very much adopt most of the kind of outside influence view in many respects, but I just don't think you can get around being real about Russia and Assad and what they have done, even in the context of Gulf CIA destabilization. They're still committing war crimes. And if we kind of jettison that as something we consider, then, I don't know where we're going. I think like a paleocon position is the only viable thing. But at any rate, overall, though, I've come full circle to just be like, you know what? Not everything is the United States, but it is mostly the United States, because we still are the world's superpower. And there's the key word, power. And so much of these discourses in the United States, whether it's, sitting around and being really, really, concerned about the situation in Venezuela, or frankly, even maybe I'm stretching, but I see it on a continuum. I can't get in and do a goddamn endorsement of Bernie Sanders because mean tweets. There's this occupation of total power, or at least a part of total power as a privileged member of the empire, essentially, combined with a complete non-ownership of any of the realities of power. So we can just have, big abstract conversations about what is and isn't right without any grounding in what is and isn't so. Does that make any sense?
That makes absolute sense, man. I mean, it makes absolute sense. And it's like infuriating, right? When Sanders, in whichever debate that was, I think it was two debates ago, right? The one before Charleston, was being red baited about this issue yet again. And his response was that, look, like, we need to be honest, right? Like, the U.S. has perpetrated coups, Guatemala and Iran, and he mentioned someplace else, I forget. But as you know, the list, like, he could still be on the debate stage, reciting the list of coups that the U.S. has perpetrated, right? And just since the end of the 19th century, right? That was a very refreshing moment, right? Because none of the rest of them ever does that, right? And the terror. So first it was the communism thing, right? The liberals. And of course, the liberals also have this dance, right? Which is, we have to show that we aren't soft on whatever the bugbear in a target of imperialist foreign policy is, right? So first it was communism, right? Now it's terrorism, right? Now it's Now it's like human rights abuses, right? But as you say, it's exactly as you say. They reach for an abstract, morally satisfying seeming stance, and completely disattend from the actual historical forces that are on the ground any place. And look, I mean, just take a case like Assad, right? The Assad regime is terrible, and his father's version of it was terrible. At the same time, what the U.S. did and others in backing the so-called democratic forces who were aligned with the Islamists and the worst radical or no, I don't want to call it that. The
conservative.
The most identitarian version of conservative Islamists, right? Because that's what they are.
Yep.
Well, it's another point. Perhaps for later, but it was worth noting, right, that a number of the minority groups in Syria tended to support Assad, not because he was great, but because he kept the other bastards from eating him, right? And that's kind of what it comes down to. And I take your point about the neocons. I'm not. I'm suggesting an American imperialist realpolitik as the way we approach these regimes. And in fact, I mean, the way I lean is, well, actually, it's probably none of our business, right? I mean,
yep.
It except in the sense that, as you also noted, 60-70% of whatever's going on in the world is messed up. Is messed up in part because the U.S. Has been stirring the pot, right? But it's not our business. And see, this is like a mindset, right, that too many leftists take from the liberals too, right? Like, we have to comment on human rights atrocities elsewhere. Well, why actually? And because the only way that leads, right, is to reinforce, this notion that the Americans are the policemen of the world, right? Because, and I mean, and I know I'm ranting now at this point, but but you and probably at least a healthy percentage of the listeners and viewers will recall Darfur, right? Mm-hmm. And that mass-produced fake movement. I'm trying not to curse on the air, but that
you can curse.
The mass. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Fake genocide, fake insurgency, fake everything, right? That played into other foreign policy interests. That sort of got a strain of Hollywood left liberals' panties wet or whatever, and provided one of those wonderful opportunities for doing well by doing good, which meant that you could support the end of the genocide by or challenging the genocide by buying a damn T-shirt.
Yeah, so it was like a green pin, and it was Mamdani at Columbia. Is that? I mean, there's one. Okay, just so people know, I believe his name. What is his name?
His name is Mahmoud Mamdani. Okay. And the book was published in the U.S. as, I think, Saviors and Survivors, but it's a brilliant piece of work. And by the way, I almost mentioned him a few minutes ago. Around the identitarian Islamism point, because not long after September 11th, he did another great book called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, which, among other things, traces the roots of Islamic fundamentalist terrorism, again, back to the U.S. and its backing of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. In fact, a colleague of mine who takes his kid to all the Rambo movies told me that I think the penultimate Rambo movie, or I hope it was the penultimate. I hope there's not one I missed.
I think there was one that came out last year.
Oh wow! Yeah, okay. I thought that might with the reanimated corpse of Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But whichever one it was, I guess it was one in the 80s that was set in Afghanistan.
Right.
Right. And and it ended there. And my friend told me that the next one, which came out in the 90s, or no, came out after September 11th, couldn't pick up the thread from Afghanistan because the film ended with Rambo hugging the damn Taliban, the Taliban, I guess, the jihadists, right?
Right.
So they set the next one, like in Burma, with some crazy ass story. So, and one thing that's really frustrating too is people never add it up, right? I mean, my friend Steve Strickland, who I mentioned before, has told me for years, like in sort of basic, Latin American politics course that he's taught for years. He said the course is basically like a compendium of U.S. interventions in Latin America from the late 19th century. And his common experience with students, and this was at the University of Arkansas, the University of New Orleans, and I don't know whether he's teaching it still at UMass Boston, but I'm sure it happened there too if he is. It was that students would go along with critical examination of each instance, right? And then their conclusion at the end of the course would be, God, it's so sad that the U.S. was so naive and like uninformed that we always back the bad guys.
Oh,
and I say, well, if you all back bad guys, then you're the fucking bad guy yourself, right? I mean, so anyway.
Do you think, and I think this relates, we'll get to the PMC officially in a minute, but one thing that always struck me was my friend Daniel Bessner, who's on this show a lot, and he teaches, he just got tenure at University of Washington. He teaches international relations and diplomatic history at University of Washington. We've talked a lot about what does it actually look like, again, because, we don't want to just become paleocons. Of course, like we want to encourage, Congress people to write a letter demanding Lula be free, or, an end to the bombardment on Gaza, or, it isn't just sort of like a Rand Paul kind of like, oh yeah, it's over there, whatever. And we want to stop this U.S. empire activity, which is, related to obviously to our supply chains and so on. But one of the things that he always struck me, and I want to run by you, is he said the question of what do you do, as in there's a crisis, even something as horrible is happening. Let's even say it isn't even manufactured. There's something real. There is actually an obscene, regime doing something barbarous to people. There is some act of oppression. And he's like, but he said the question, here's a crisis, what do you do, is fundamentally reactionary. In other words, it could only ever yield the wrong kind of answers.
Right. That's a very good point, a very smart point. And I'm glad the University of Washington has recognized this and
yes.
And it's been right. Because that's true, man. I mean, look, like you go back to Clinton's concoction of humanitarian bombing, right? And that's been kind of part of the foundation of liberal approach to foreign policy since then, right? And it's kind of cool for them, like in a sense that, especially since you're not bombing states or regimes that have the capacity to shoot the planes down. And in fact, it's common now, which is one of the most perverse things I can imagine, that the long range bomber pilots live where they live, right? Like in North Dakota or wherever. They have breakfast, they take the kids to school, kiss them goodbye, and then get in a plane and then drive to the Balkans or to the Maghreb and just start bombing the shit out of people and then come back home, right? But like I was driving once in the Darfur moment from DC back to Philly, and I was listening to NPR, and they had a guy on. I'm pretty sure he was Irish just from the accent, but like a human rights militant, And he was going on with I'm retailing all the bogus shit about, the genocide. And was demanding, right, like a humanitarian intervention. So I'm thinking, well, what does humanitarian intervention look like? And he was so purple with it, that the host felt that he or she had to ask a question about, well, aren't you concerned about this Sudanese national sovereignty? And his response, which captures everything about this crap for me, is no, right? And this is a point that Downey made too, that's what the stakes of calling these conflicts genocide is all about. It's about preempting debate, right? Because if you call for studying the situation and point to complexity, then this is a robocall from my congresswoman.
How dare she?
Who just endorsed Joe Biden about a week ago.
No, they're trying to interrupt the show.
Right. Yeah, man. They'll stop at nothing. But this guy's thing was, we don't have time to think about stuff like that, and that's when a light bulb went off in my head. So this stuff, right, the human rights discourse works hand in glove with empire, right? And even so, if the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that, the Democrats want to put together a coalition of our allies, and the Republicans want to just be a cowboy about it. That's a distinction, but it's a distinction without a difference, right? It kind of reminds me of when I was a kid we watched the cowboy movies, and my dad would always laugh about how the sheriff, so there's a horse thief or cattle thief or a killer or whatever, and the good people of the town want to lynch him, and the sheriff faces down the mob with his shotgun and says, we're not going to lynch this person. We're going to have a trial and then hang him legal, right? And that's what the difference is in the Democrats and Republicans. Right? They want to put some salad dressing.
Do you think? Well, and I'm also struck in an interview that people should watch. Thabo Mbeki is a fascinating guy. I've mentioned him a couple times on the show. Problematic guy, but fascinating person. And an interview with Mike Hanna, who's been a guest on the show a bunch for Al Jazeera, when they talked about Africa and the International Criminal Court. And Mbeki made a really interesting point. He said, he was a major part, for people who are less familiar, of the negotiations that led to the end of apartheid. He was somebody who was, back channeling and as a member of the ANC and negotiating with people around the apartheid regime. And he said, if an international court came in and arrested de Klerk and his advisors while we were negotiating with them, and they're right, they were guilty of crimes against humanity. They ran an apartheid state. They murdered people I know. We would have begged the international community to stop because I needed them. I needed to work with them to achieve a deal. Right. And there was nothing that could override the legitimacy of our own process, basically. We needed to have that. You could not supersede that. I always thought that was a hell of a point, related back to what you were. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
When it comes to the PMC, we've talked about them a lot. And I think what has been so clear about, look, the Warren campaign, the only benefit of the Warren campaign is I think it's a body blow to wokeness and the PMC in some respects. But was this the reason? Because there was even a time where I was like, I get it that, they're annoying, they're sanctimonious, they're whatever. Right. But there still really just is not a very strong left in this country. And there's going to be alliances and liberals, particularly when we're talking electorally. And now that, this sort of total, this bomb detonation over essentially, some combination, I think, of actually deeper ideological considerations that might not even be articulated, but also just personal grievance. It gets us into a new time where, and maybe you were already there. I mean, you've been warning us about these people for a long time, but what does that say about okay, if poor people are still not voting and working people are still not voting for beyond, I think it's a chicken and egg. I think in order to get them out for something like Sanders, it's almost like Sanders' campaign that he's been running as a second term one. I've just delivered some great things for 4 years. Now you believe enough to come in. So it's never about blaming the electorate, but it's the truth that it's a problem that those people are not coming out. That's a problem for a left-wing project. And then definitively, the wing of the PMC that would like to brand identify itself as being concerned with poverty and healthcare and all these things, a lot of them, and including not just the campaign, but groups that didn't endorse Sanders and people that, have a policy manifesto that's identical to his, but, stayed neutral, all this other, they're not serious about it. So what do we do? What's the lesson?
Well, yeah, $64 question, right? I mean, what I've been in conference calls for the last few days where we've been talking in concrete terms about that kind of stuff. I really say about the PMC, I mean, because like lately, I don't know, in the last 3 or 4 months maybe, I've been either part of or on the periphery of several interesting ongoing discussions about the role of the PMC and how to parse them and whatnot. And I think that there's a tendency to veer into a scholasticism about this, right? In the sense, look, it's not just intellectuals, right? Our species operates with taxonomy. So we are the species that taxonomizes,
yes,
right, and gets our writers from upright posture. But I think, see, at this point, the difference between it's important to make a distinction between analysis and politics. Yeah. And the point that I've got about the PMC is, like, we understand its incoherence and the range of occupations and status categories and aspirations that are in it. And how I've come to think about this is, the good ones are the ones who are going to come to us in the left program. Those who don't come to us are not even necessarily the bad ones. They could be the ones who haven't quite figured it out, or for whom things haven't gotten bad enough yet, right? But there's clearly like an element of that large stratum, right, that is opposed to a left politics, and opposed to a left politics culturally, intellectually, emotionally. I'm out. So, like, take Warren for a second, right? I never saw her as a leftist. What I've always seen her as is like a 1912 progressive with the capital P, right? Because she's not committed to politics, to left politics. She's made that very clear. The mystery to me about what happened in her camp, by the way, is, some of us are really afraid, you may have been too, that she was going to hang with the left for long enough to give the liberals what they wanted in discrediting Bernie, right. and I think her move. And the thing I can't understand for the life of me was the smart Cambridge people around her. I think maybe they just got so jacked up with how popular she seemed to be. And I was saying to a colleague today, one thing that 40 years of faculty meetings taught me, it is the one thing academics cannot do at all is count the damn votes, right? So
yes.
So
right.
I think they took we are smarter than everybody we have come to dominate with their persona. So this may also be an element of the extent to which the woke bullshit was driving the campaign.
Right.
But she made the move to the right exactly the same move that Kamala Harris had made a month and a half earlier. And I don't understand how they could see how it tanked Harris, but couldn't see it was going to tank her. Now I'm happy it did, because otherwise, my nightmare scenario might have come true. And now, of course, none of them ever mentions it, right? I mean, they've already. I saw an article in the Times a couple of days ago where they've taken the knives out and are going after one another anonymously, which is what campaign operatives of that sort do,
right?
Because they got to try to get the resume straight for the next job. But nobody has said anything about the fact that she had originally identified with a left program. She turned away from the left program and then tanked immediately. So, but it's everything else, right? It's like, sexism. It's like, and I mean, the way I would hope the way that she, and for that matter, Klobuchar, right? I mean, started reaching as the ship was going down for, this big tall guy standing too close to me. Bernie told me something that no one could ever imagine that Bernie would actually say. Right. Plus, not to mention, she's got a history as a liar. So, right. But yeah, so, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think.
Do you think that there's any, and I'll just put this again for people who need these disclaimers. This is not a denial of sexism as an example of a force in society and politics and things that we need to, but there's a broader context obviously for dealing with. But in this specific Warren narrative, like, yes, for sure. Like, is there broad, like I actually said from the very beginning, and people did not like this, and I was talking purely just political performance. And I would say, I don't think that Elizabeth Warren, and I'm being very generous, I'm not talking ideologically, I'm saying stipulate that she's great, okay? I don't see her as a campaigner, as somebody that can actually go up and win a general election. And then folks would say, well, that, partially that's gendered and so on. I'd say, you know what? I agree. Absolutely. And just as the case with Obama, it's harder for a black man to get elected president. So you needed, frankly, a guy who had, serious political talent as a campaigner. Like, this is part of this stuff is just theater. It's just movies, and you have it or you don't. And to watch what's happened in the past couple of weeks, and this is my question, where it isn't like, again, if we're just looking at this clinically, Pete Buttigieg, he did a lot for himself. This guy is a friggin' little town mayor who finished third in the race. Like, that is a crazy overperformance. Elizabeth Warren, I don't think finished second in a single state. She's a fifth place finisher she performed worse than, and if Klobuchar had stayed in, Klobuchar did class solidarity and dropped out, but Klobuchar, I'm sure, would have won Minnesota. Elizabeth Warren had a failed, poorly finished campaign. And the type of ink blaming sexism or this or that is starting to look to me the same way in the Jon Stewart era with George W. Bush, where it's just like a moment where a certain part of woke culture, it's turning into like, that just isn't true. And that was previously only reserved for, the crazy conservatives, right? The people who think the earth is flat. And this is the first moment in a culture where you're seeing a reaction to just it was so close and it came up short, so we can parse the variables. We're talking, you failed. And all of these justifications and fantasies are not grounded in reality. What is the implication for that kind of discourse, you think, when it's so in denial of things?
Well, it's kind of like that in 2016 too.
Yeah, that's true.
And I mean, going back to Obama, I mean, he was definitely skilled at performing the persona that got elected, right? I think is the way to put it. But I think his election also, depended on the bottom falling out of the economy and John McCain having the hubris to think that he could tap how should I put this? A narcissistic moron version of an Ellie Mae Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies. and
Yes.
Vice President, and that shit was funny the first time around. And like when I saw her give that acceptance speech, I was actually sitting in the green room in the studio waiting to go on the Bill Moyers show, and I thought, oh my God, this is a nightmare because she's so good at this. And my son said, like, he began to look for jobs in Canada, right? But we didn't know that she's an ill-tempered sociopathic moron,
right,
who wouldn't prep, learn, right?
Right.
And I mean, that shit was cute till the economy crashed. And then there are probably a lot of people out there thinking, wait, if we vote for McCain, then she's like a heartbeat away from the presidency. Let's go with the color guy, right? But I want to say about the Buttigieg thing too. Well, for first of all, and I've been saying this like, kind of over and over to friends, but that I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in the room when Buttigieg met with Jimmy Carter, because it's right after that he dropped out of the race, and it's clear that Carter had the portfolio to offer him something, right? And he could be stupid enough to think that an offer of the vice presidency would be a good thing, because there's no way that tickets would ever wind up in the White House. But I've got a slightly different take on the Klobuchar thing, because my hunch is it's based on nothing except
Tell me.
I mean her a little bit. She resisted calls to drop out, right? And then she went to that rally back home in Minnesota, and some Black Lives Matter types disrupted it. And then she dropped out shortly after that. And my take on this is that, which says something else about the links between the woke types and the foundations and the DNC. But I mean, my take on this is that the DNC basically sent them out there, right, to give her the message. And I mean, as I've been saying, it's not quite the same thing as a horse's head in the bed, but it's part of the same genus.
So
right?
and I like this because just to be really clear, so when the local branch of the NAACP came out, and you are somebody who, again, it's for another day, but if you read, Dr. Reed's work, get into like the material connections between these worlds. Amy Klobuchar, by all evidence, railroaded a kid in a horrifying, and she did it with plenty of things. There was a thing she was attacking the Somali community for, some harmless intoxicant. I mean, she was doing what you would do as a, suburban sociopath DA to race bait and show you're quote unquote tough on crime. But it was noticeable. I mean, I went with the story, sure, and, because it's an important story, but it was very noticeable. Like, that's interesting. I wonder what that has to do with Joe Biden. Like, that's very interesting timing that all of a sudden The View is so concerned about racial injustice and sentencing with this person who's never been critiqued on anything. In fact, was a media darling for months.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And look, the thing that's had my head kind of spinning a little bit, and a number of my colleagues and comrades, is the rapidity with which they turned this thing. By the time they got to South Carolina, after Nevada.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not the kind of person to get all jacked up and optimistic about a win like the Nevada win, because among other reasons, like the other side has shown us from the beginning this time around that they are much more concerned about Sanders and the left than they are about Trump getting another term. And once you see that, then all bets are off. And I've been joking in sort of gallows humor that, okay, well, if he wins the nomination, then it's time to start to look over our shoulders for the death squads, because we may actually be at a moment or have come to an historical juncture, for those who like it that way, at which, and I apologize in advance for the reified language, but at which neoliberalism's capacity to disorganize the working class has waned.
Right. Right.
And that's a lesson to take from around the globe, especially the pink tide, right? And the other part of that lesson is the ease with which neoliberalism can take on authoritarian forms. I mean, frankly, if you go back to the founders, Hayek, Friedman, I mean, those guys are very clear that a condition for a free market utopian world is an authoritarian government, right? Because otherwise, I mean, the masters are going to want stuff. So we may be at a point where there are really only two ways to go, right? And one is is to align with pursuit of what's in effect like a social democratic agenda, and the other is authoritarian neoliberalism. And I'll say this too before I shut up, that if Biden were to win somehow, right? If Krakatoa were to explode again, and the coronavirus were to merge with the Black Death, right?
I think that's it, frankly. Like, we're seeing it. If there is a major public health crisis that tanks the economy, there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so he might be able to win.
Right.
But what he would do if he wins is, as he said over and over and over, try to reinstate the status quo ante, which would be likely given what happened in 2016. And I know, political scientists will talk about 45,000 votes or 80,000 votes or whatever. But that could prepare the way for a more serious and connected and competent Trump. And we could be in huge trouble, right? I mean, either way.
Do you think? Oh, sorry.
I think I may have gotten response to the question.
No. That's the thing with you though, is it's all good. Do you think? I mean, two more really broad questions. One, I was being provocative, and so I don't exactly mean this literally. And in fact, Hillary should not have done this the way she did this. But do you think Bernie should do a deplorable speech that's about the PMC?
Well, I would love it if you did. But, well, see, and I guess this is the thing I want to say about this too. That, I mean, going back to 2015, right? And we really thought that this was a long shot, right? Yep. That he could win the nomination. And it seemed like less of a long shot this time around, but it's still that there's still that contradiction, right? Of needing the out there political movement to advance the campaign, and in this case, because of American conditions, the campaign has been the vehicle for creating space to try to do the movement building. And just from the work that we've been doing in South Carolina the last few months, we can see pretty clearly that works, right? And we've got this opportunity, and the analogy that came to my head today is that's like a relay race, right?
Yeah.
Sanders and the electoral stuff are the first leg, and now it looks pretty much like they're going to be passing the baton to us, or I mean to the people out there who are focused on trying to create the movement. And speaking of the lives of the PMC, probably 80%, if not more, I'm feeling kind of charitable about this, of the stuff that we get in our emails every day from insurgent group here, there, right? I mean, what I often call the internet fundraising left,
right, is
absolutely Potemkin politics.
Yes.
Right. So, and that's the problem, right? Right. The institutional configurations that would actually keep a working class movement alive are so hollowed out and have been replaced, even on trade union staffs, ironically, but have been replaced by ambitious young elite college people who believe earnestly, right, in shit like doing well by doing good, and I'm hearing people's voices and the whole panoply of the works.
Right.
So we're basically starting from scratch out there.
That was the final question I wanted to ask you, and this will do a lot more. And again, I think this essentialism or liberation is weaved into all of this. But talk about the work you're doing in South Carolina. We're going to talk about it a lot more on the show. At some point, I really want to come and visit and see what's going on, because this is where the rubber meets the road, and you're actually doing it. So talk about it, please, a little bit.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, just to put this on your calendar, the South Carolina AFL-CIO is having its legislative conference on the 30th of this month. So I'm just saying.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we decided, and we as the Debs Jones Douglas Institute, decided to target South Carolina for a Medicare for All campaign, and we really, we started off nibbling around the edges back last summer, but we really sort of crafted in the action plan, and we got things rolling in early December. And we targeted South Carolina for several reasons. I mean, the first one was we've worked down there for 20 years and have connections, right, all the way through the labor movement, including like the newly elected president of the state Fed was one of the people who was involved in creating the South Carolina Labor Party in
that's cool.
06 and 07, which is a vehicle that we have there. That could be used, and is deeply committed to the Medicare for All struggle, which he sees as part of rebuilding the Federation, and also his objectives of asserting labor's voice as a force to be reckoned with in South Carolina politics, and he understands that the Fed ought to be a leader in the Medicare for All campaign, and sees that as part of creating space for the union movement to expand. Right? It's not a matter of pulling up the gangplank and saying, well, we got our health and welfare fund, so I mean, hell with you. But also because South Carolina is an emblematic place in politics, certainly, and especially around this fiction of the black vote and this idea of South Carolina as being a firewall for Dems. And look, between early December and the primary, we got more than 10,000, maybe even close to 12 or 13,000 people who signed pledge cards, indicating that they wanted to vote only for candidates who supported Medicare for All. So, I mean, there's a base, down there, right, to build on and to build from, and our message to people has been all along that all the rest of these assholes are going to be gone on March 1st. Right. But we're here. Like, we're trying to finish crafting phase 3 of the organizing project now. If I may, I'd like to kind of escape for a second here, right? Because I think it's really important for us to get straight about what this black vote thing is.
Yes, please go ahead. Please.
And I've spent the last couple of days puzzling over this and talking to comrades and stuff. Among other things, I wanted to reconstruct like the origins of this line, right? Of the line that any any Democratic candidate to be successful has to win this thing called the black vote. And the next step from that is that South Carolina stands out because it's the first state with a heavy concentration of black voters. Pardon me. So I was thinking about this. It's a line that really originated in 2016 with the Clinton campaign, right? And it rested on a kind of partial reinvention of the Obama narrative from 2008, right? Because that narrative is that Obama became really viable and a real contender when he won South Carolina.
And I'm old enough to remember, just because essentialism gives and takes, I'm old enough to remember when Bill Clinton went out and said, South Carolina, you know, whatever, Jesse Jackson won it. That was their line in 08.
No, that's right. Right. And in fact, the reality is that Obama's real boost came from that field operation that he put together in Iowa. Right. But so like then I'm thinking, well, then what's the work that this narrative does? If, as Cedric Johnson pointed out in 2016, and we just did like in a little piece we did in Common Dreams, that these are, first of all, the southern states that have the heaviest concentration of black voters in the primaries are, first of all, states that know Democrats going to win in November, right? And the logic according to which people vote in those states is kind of idiosyncratic and complex, just like all voting is. Because the number one problem with the idea of the black vote is that the black vote is a ventriloquist dummy, right? Right, because black people vote in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons, right? It's understandable that in the southern states that are dominated by not just Republicans but the worst rabid right-wing Republicans, that voting would come to be functionally driven more by defensive imperatives than by aspirational ones, right?
Right.
And I mean that makes perfect sense. And so what happened? And look, I mean, there's nothing else that the Sanders campaign could have done. So it was kind of sandbagged in this way, because if you try to challenge the narrative and say, well, actually, South Carolina doesn't matter worth a hill of beans, right? Right. Because there's no way anybody's going to, right? Right. Then you know what you get, right? Disrespecting black voters, right? I mean, so forth and so on. So, I mean, that meant that the campaign had to try to compete on an environment, on terrain that was all uphill.
And isn't this like just in the last couple of minutes? I mean, this is something that I try to bang on about. I've learned a lot from you, but it's also just common sense. I mean, okay, there obviously, I'm going to just make it really simple. I mean, if you experience racism because you're, have an interaction with a cop because of your race, or you're denied a loan because of your race, that is a that is a universally extrapolated. That's racism, and that's it. Simple, direct. And then conversely, actually, where we get to this like woke liberal essentialism, to use their nomenclature, it erases. Like I always use the example of New York City. I mean, just even understanding Harlem, Manhattan, black political tradition and machines and revolutionary impulses, and all of that is totally different in many key ways than Brooklyn black politics. In terms, migration, immigrate, where like somebody who came to New York from the Great Migration, who came to this country as property and has roots in the South, versus somebody who is second generation from Barbados. I mean, these are, and again, I'll keep reiterating for people who don't get it, those same two people can absolutely be the victim of American racism, obviously.
Right.
But conversely, to say that they're exactly the same voter, in fact, if you want to play that game, it's racist. I mean, it's a radically different, and we see this like even in 16, you know, Malika Jabali showed by the time you got to the industrial Midwest, that vote got a hell of a lot closer when you're talking about places with that track with everything else. Strong labor unions, as an example.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm glad you call it for what it is, because that belief and assertion is like the quintessence of fucking racism, right? I mean, how can it not be, right? Well, in the first place, it rests on a premise that races exist, right, as unitary entities. Well, I mean, look it up, right? Right. I don't know if in Webster's, but certainly in the 1940s, 49, 51, whatever, UN statements on race, that's the essence of racism. Well, it's got to be the essence of racism. I don't even need to cite a book on that, right? Because it's categorically true. So what does that leave us then? And what I would say about this is, and this is something else that was clear in 2016, has been even more clear since 2016, that notion, right? I mean, that insistence that we understand all problems that affect Black people or other not white people, including Sicilians. But well, no, I'm just joking about that. But as through a lens of race, is fundamentally a class program, because the race, just like the Black vote or the Black community, is a ventriloquist dummy, and it's a ventriloquist dummy that the aspirational PMC are the Edgar Bergens of. Right now, that's a really old reference, but you get the drift.
I'm trusting your instincts that you're a funny man. That's how I'm laughing at that reference. But so that this, and you actually, yes, you relate this to also. And again, you can internationalize it to make it even kind of less outside of the edginess, if you want, of some of these, conversations. But what is the difference between we need to, liberate the Kurds in Turkey as an oppressed group, right, and then also as workers, right, and also as subjects of the state, versus right, we want to create a narrow lane of patronage networks that represents, right, but does not actually liberate a community, let alone the broader problems of hierarchy and oppression and exploitation in Turkish society. Is that the point, the drift?
No, absolutely. And I'd just add as a footnote that, and like this is, I'm not sure what the sources are, but I've noticed since Katanga and the secessionist movement in the Congo, right, that these culturally autonomous peoples who yearn to be free also tend to be sitting on extractive, on minerals, diamonds, copper, oil, uranium, and the two just kind of reinforce each other a little bit too.
Right. Adolph Reed Jr., we appreciate you. You'll be back on again hopefully next month, really as often as you can. Folks, everybody order class notes. Read Adolph's work.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Thanks man. Take care.
Always.
And thanks once again for having me.
Oh, please. Thank you. All right, folks. There's just always so much nutrition talking with Adolph Reed. Here's what we'll do. Let's take a really brief break. Then we're going to do the gem. And then we'll play that Warren video during the main show because it's fun. Let's just take a brief break. We'll come back with the gem and a little bit of fun. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show, the great, the just indispensable Adolph Reed Jr. Read it. It's so amazing. That's an example of the kind of incredible conversations that we have on the show. This Sunday, for patrons, Joanna Wiest is going to join us. She's postdoc at Princeton University, and we're talking about biomedical essentialism and and building a actual socialist project. Now it's time for the gem. Good news. Cheery, fun, nice news.
Well,
with David Griscom. Can we do that as an alternative, actually? Cheery, fun, nice news with David Griscom.
Buy low, sell high, folks.
Yeah. You should just come out like Kramer one day.
I was about to say,
you should do like, that would be actually, Communist Kramer's an interesting one. And so what are we doing? We're collectivizing.
I would love it. I would love to wake up like from a coma in like 5 years, and I look up on the screen in the corner of the room is David Griscom on CNBC with the same hair,
just like
cowboy
like
boots,
smashing, like he's like hits a punching bag. He's like, what's that? The co-op economy, folks. Yeah. I'm doubling down on
it.
Those
are fracking stocks in North Dakota.
Just actually being, that's actually funny. Not even taking it like the silly, like, what if it was a communist direction, but just literally David Griscom just ends up as like,
it means
what am I looking at? Exxon's roaring back, everybody. It's called oil. We all need it every day. Ding, 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 ding.
All right.
What's really going on?
I mean, I'm obviously I have to talk about what's been happening this week in the stock market. And just generally, I mean, things are looking pretty bad. Even Richard Wolff, who's always very hesitant to make any kind of predictions, has been coming out and saying things are looking very bad and very frightening. I mean, what we saw on Monday was a massive crash on the stock market. They actually had to stop trading, which is a very bad sign. And then on Tuesday, there was a slight rally. And then today we saw the crash come in again, and officially the Dow is in a bear market now, which means that the outlook is very bleak. And people are blaming this on coronavirus, and obviously coronavirus is a major factor, and people are right to be frightened by the Trump administration's response to this serious crisis, the failure of the United States.
But there's also the people who just didn't go to work, but they were fine, so that wasn't getting factored in.
I mean, it's definitely. I'm excited to watch Trump's speech a little bit later. To see
we're gonna have that at 9 o'clock.
So anyways, coronavirus is definitely something to be worried about, but I think that we shouldn't let people get away with this excuse. One, people have been worried about the state of the U.S. economy for the past few months. There's been very frightening signs like the repo crisis that happened in September. And also very recently, over the past couple of weeks, we've seen this very incredible and frightening share in the benchmark 10-year rate for treasuries. 10-year treasuries are probably one of the more safe, like the safest investment that you can make. They're very secure. The United States government doesn't look like it's going anywhere. So when you see a lot of people flooding and buying 10-year treasuries, that means that people are very worried. And also when you have a bunch of people buying 10-year treasuries, then the yield, the money that you make back in 10 years, it falls dramatically. So people essentially are just paying to put their money somewhere where they think it's going to be safe, not necessarily to turn a profit. And you see when that's happening, as the stock market is falling, that there's a very serious crisis when it comes to investors. Now, I just want to hit the history that's led us to this moment, because they're going to blame this on coronavirus. They're saying that, we were coming, you hear Trump, you hear people even in the financial press saying, we're in the strongest economy. This is the strongest recovery that we've ever seen. And if you've been watching the Gem over the past couple of years, I've been trying to say, it's like, yes, there are some metrics that look very strong, but they look strong for people who have money and power. And we're seeing that that's a smaller and smaller group in society. And it's being the people who do have money are benefiting from this, are doing so on a very shaky basis. So essentially, what are stocks supposed to be? Stocks are supposed to be a right on future profits. So basically, you put your money up front, and then as that corporation becomes profitable in the future, you get paid back, right? Now, we've seen that that's not exactly what stocks represent anymore. Stocks themselves are an investment and are played around and inflated with, and it's gone to a point where they're very much separate from even any kind of expectation with profitability. We've seen that with the tech stocks, but we're starting to see people wake up for a second and say, hey, it looks like our enthusiasm was misplaced, and all of this kind of ideological inflation that goes into the stock market, you're starting to see that evaporate very quickly. So look at the recovery that we had. We had this massive crisis in the United States that devastated our economy. And the only way and how we dealt with this was by using the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, and then also things like buying up the bad assets and quantitative easing. But specifically, let's just talk about what the Federal Reserve did by lowering interest rates. I mean, we've been living through almost a decade of some of the lowest interest rates from the Federal Reserve in American history. Now, what you need to understand is that the Fed funds rates, the interest rate that the Federal Reserve sets, that's essentially the price of money in the economy, right? So that is going to be the baseline on how all of these other interest rates are set. So what's happened is that cheap money has led to cheap thinking. And we've seen a massive ballooning in corporate debt. We've seen basically people taking out, taking out loans so that corporations taking out loans so that they can just buy their own stock up, right? Which I talked about a while ago when we were talking about how bad this corporate debt bubble had gotten. And, there's some liberal economists who say, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing because you can always borrow money in the future. But the reality is, in an environment that we're seeing today, where it doesn't look like the Federal Reserve has a lot of weapons in its arsenal to deal with the downturn, when you have a crisis like coronavirus come into the economy that actually does threaten production in a way that even the most enthusiastic imbecile could not deny, and that's the reality. Most of these people are enthusiastic imbeciles, and they just
Talking about Larry Kudlow?
Yeah, I know.
You got a lot happening.
He's a little bit more of a drunk imbecile.
Well, I don't know. I'm drinking vodka because she kills Corona. My Corona.
Oh, Jesus
My Corona.
Honestly, I don't think we're too far off from
It's very important not to panic. Larry Kudlow.
We have contained this. We have contained this. I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight. We've done a good job in the United States. Hats off to our public health people. And
coming to a TV.
Public health people.
Coming to a TV near you.
My niece wanted to probably said not gonna make any money. You just drink vodka, kill the virus.
Look, you need a healthy amount of alcohol in all your drinks if you want to kill the virus.
Let me tell you something, just this morning, beer's not gonna work. It's gotta be real.
It's be hard. So, the plan to get us out of this crisis, though, was never to reform the economy, to say, hey, it's not a good thing that the United States economy is basically based on speculation and asset inflation, be it stocks or property, right? They said, what we should do is we should just find a way to keep the system afloat, and they just continue to pump money and to allow the speculative system to continue. And what's worse about the situation is now we basically have a decade of speculation propped up by very low interest rates, which means that as things start to get more shaky, when you have these outside pushes like the coronavirus, it puts the entire system in a very serious situation. Basically, to put it clearly, the United States economy has been running for the past 10 years, and chasing it has been this zombie. And that zombie was the original crisis. And all that we've done is work as hard as we can to basically put a little bit of space behind us and that initial crisis, but we never dealt with that crisis because we never dealt with the fundamental problem of the U.S. economy. That is the incredibly unequal society that we're creating, and the complete divorce between profit and productivity. Profit and the actual function of the economy, which should be providing people with goods and services and things that are necessary. It's all been this kind of game to try to find ways to make money off of money, and it's catching up to us now. I don't know necessarily what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. I'm not in this kind of game of making predictions in that sense. What I'm trying to provide people is an understanding of the ways that the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve, basically institutions that are supposed to be looking out for us, have acted over the past decade, so that as we see economic crisis, you can understand it and be prepared, one, for crisis, and two, to start making the argument that we need to be making. And that argument is that the United States economy has been in crisis for decades now, and that if the federal government and if the Federal Reserve are going to be involved, they need to be getting involved in ways that help out the average person. Instead of spending all of this money trying to reinflate asset prices for a very few investors, we should have been, all the way back in 2008, trying to say, we need to spend this money for the benefit of people. So that means doing things like a Green New Deal. That means investing in massive public works projects, investing in a jobs guarantee so that we can actually push up the wages of the average American instead of putting a wider gap between the richest and the working class. If we don't deal with this and we continue trying to find, tricks and if we continue trying to allow basically technocrats at the top to try to find tricks out of a crisis that has been ongoing since the beginning of capitalism, but has really become articulated over the past 30, 40 years, it's only going to get worse. It's not just the United States, it's Europe, it's Japan, it's all of these massive industrialist capitalist societies are all facing the same decline. And if you start to see that across the board, you need to start asking yourself, well, is it a temporary thing or is it these systems? And I'll tell you right now, friends, it's this system.
How do you say that about Donald Trump economy? When more Dominicans are working in the history of the country.
I love how we always have those stats.
We have more Puerto Rican people with one arm working in the Bronx than has ever happened. And that's the Donald Trump economy.
Do you want to watch a cuddler?
Yeah,
clip?
I do. Let's do a little cuddle. Let's have some fun. Let's get some real economic analysis in here.
I don't want to downplay anything and worry about the effect on human beings, for heaven's sake. But I'm just saying, let's not overreact. Yeah. In many ways,
I hear that, Larry,
America
but a lot of
should stay at work. We should stay at work.
Health professions that I speak to, Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA commissioner, would say very different things, in particular about Seattle and about the government response that needs to actually take place and how we need to be a lot more formidable in our response. And statements like the ones you just made are actually encouraging people to do things that they shouldn't and that will actually cause the spread of the virus as opposed to it stopping.
Well, I don't. That's not what. Look, Scott Gottlieb's a brilliant guy and a friend of mine. With respect to Seattle, all right, that would be a place you would avoid for now. And Governor Newsom declaring California emergency state, especially Northern California. I understand that. Avoid it. Exercise common sense. But the rest of the country is not suffering from those kinds of breakouts, at least not yet. I don't want to suggest it might not occur in the future.
Pause that. Hey, Scott Gottlieb's my friend. We're friends. He's a good guy. And I'm not saying, look, drink a bottle of whiskey. All right? Pour vodka on your face. It kills bacteria. I'm not saying not take Picard. Obviously, don't go to Seattle. Why would you want to go to Seattle anyway? It's rainy.
Get some Elijah Craig, 68% barrel proof. You'll be fine.
Yeah, and do that. Look, if you want to go to Northern California, bathe in a bathtub of Glengoyne. That's what you do to protect yourself from the virus.
A wild turkey rare breed.
Can we watch more of that, please? Hell, I'm not saying you don't do comedy. I love that message. He's like, it's fine. Keep it working. Obviously, you don't go to major parts of the western part of the country. You'll die. I'm not an idiot. I'm just saying everywhere else, you should just go get the muffin that you like in the morning.
Look, if you feel bad, you go to work. Look, I felt bad this morning. Yeah. I was drinking and I felt bad. Look, I can't work. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm still here. And I haven't done this since the 1980s. And I saw, look, it's an alternative viewpoint. We like all viewpoints. Cocaine and baking soda. My niece sent me a Facebook post. And so, cocaine shouldn't be a regular part of the diet. But what it can do with baking soda, I've heard, I don't want to be irresponsible. I don't know. Scott Gottlieb, maybe he disagrees. He's the guy you fucking love so much. Maybe he says it doesn't work. But I heard cocaine and baking soda. That's what I heard. So if you work at Walmart and you're one of the new Dominican people that we've put to work in the Trump economy, put some cocaine and baking soda. Just get back to work. Be protected from the corona. Bye, corona.
Oh my god. Dude, he really is drunk on the job. We're not even joking.
We think. We are joking.
I mean,
we don't know. Oh my God!
Come on,
okay,
man.
This is Larry Kudlow while Mike Pence is speaking. Gosh, stay awake. Gotta look serious. Gotta stay. Oh, my head.
Sweat it out.
Sweat it out.
Some vaccine.
Sweat it out. Hey, Mike, are there emergency packs?
Got alcohol by volume 62.7 at a minimum.
So the good news is I've drank enough that I could never get corona. The bad news, my head really hurts, Mike.
And I got a hangover virus.
I got a hangover virus. People are all running. They go, I have corona. Yeah, you got to sit in a room and be by yourself, watch Netflix. I just stand here and listen to Mike.
Honestly, I understand.
Why can't I be in a room? I want to go back. I want to watch Trading Places when Eddie Murphy was funny. He was the king of the box office. That was because Reagan made the first black superstar, and the Trump unemployment rate among black people is really low. Guys, I can't do the same. I take a break. Can we pretend that I had a heart attack again? You know what? Let's just hang for a few minutes in case Trump comes on time. Actually, you know what, guys? Actually, we're going to do that in the post game.
Yeah, we can just start from the beginning.
Yeah, we'll start from me. All right, folks. We've got a lot to get to in the post game. And the way you do it, the way you join us, the way you have fun with us, you build with us, we figure this Machiavelli spirituality thing out. We go in depth with Adolph Reed Jr. And we build out this really important project. It's patreon.com/TMBS. We're not canceling Austin and Boston. We'll see you there. I actually do. I have no trust at the federal level, but I actually have trust on some state levels, to be honest. But take precautions, be careful, be good. All right. See you in the post game.